all aboard. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mike, and you've now arrived in my train of thought. It's also time to once again ask the question, where do we go from here? The penultimate division that we're going to do today or talk about in this moment in time is the AFC West. And it was the only AFC division with 3 playoff teams in it. Unfortunately, 2 didn't get out of round 1, but 3 playoff teams made from the AFC West. Good work by the division overall. Well, except the Raiders. Speaking of which, the Raiders had a rough year, to say the least. It felt like they were going to have the first overall pick for a lot of the season. It felt like they were going to be bad enough to have their choice of Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward to light up the Vegas night. And then a funny thing happened on the way to the end of the year. They opted to win games. They won a couple of them. They beat Jacksonville when losing was the better option for them to get a higher draft pick. And then they followed it up by beating the Saints by 2 scores, which complicated things even worse. And then obviously losing to the Chargers, but that game really didn't mean anything to either team. And the Raiders' punishment for this was to fall very, very far in the draft, at least in terms of getting a quarterback. The Raiders' offense did its best to not do well, or did its worst, I guess. They were 6th from the bottom in terms of total yards. They were, in terms of the passing game, actually decent because of Brock Bowers. They were actually above average and close to the top 10 in this regard. The running game didn't exist. It was last. This is what happens when you let Josh Jacobs go. You don't really have your running game in place. Brock Bowers, although, was amazing. He was first-team All-Pro. He was the best tight end in the league last year. He was as advertised as he came onto the scene and absolutely shredded cats. He really was the one redeeming factor on this offense. The one redeeming factor on the defense, obviously, well, the number one, is Max Crosby. But we'll get to that in a second because we got to think about the Raiders' points and lack thereof that they scored. They were 4th from the bottom. So, yeah, you can see it was not good for the Raiders. Now to the defense and Max Crosby, where he was excellent when he played. And there were some games he missed, but he was excellent when he played. The Raiders' defense, aside from him, just wasn't cutting mustard. They were at least decent in terms of the yardage output. They were decent again in terms of the passing defense. This is kind of above average from all these things. And they were closer to the top 10 in terms of the rushing defense. So where's the fly in the ointment? It's the points. Points-wise, and some of this obviously turnovers and shorter fields because the offense was so bad. They were 7th from the bottom in terms of the points given up. It was not good. The Raiders coaching Antonio Pierce, who was unfortunately, I think, in a little bit over his head. I thought Pierce was going to be pretty good as a coach considering how he ended the 23 year, but it turns out it was not a fair fight for him because the roster was just underwhelmed and overmatched, and it just wasn't great. The quarterback situation with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, it didn't matter who was under center. It was just a bad look regardless, and nothing was done, at least well, for Las Vegas. The Raiders do, however, have some money, which is good, and they kind of need to figure it out ASAP. They're actually 7th in the league, 8th in the league, I should say, in terms of cap space at $47.5 million in cap space as we enter day 2 of free agency, in the first full day of free agency. The Raiders are 7th or 8th best in terms of the cap space. They should be, you would think, better on offense. Can't be much worse. And they're going to have to get Christian Wilkins back. Well, Wilkins did not play for a lot of this season. He was expected to be a big-time move after the Dolphins let him go to free agency, and he just did not play too much. So we'll see if Wilkins can be healthy and then come back. The Raiders have made some critical moves, some of the keys being getting Geno Smith in a trade with Seattle. I'll explain that when I get to the draft picks. And then they also got Jeremy Chin from the Panthers to help their safety spot after losing Trevor Mooring in that spot. So we'll see what the Raiders can do otherwise. They're going to have to make some other things happen when it comes to this season to get out of the basement in the AFC West. Picks wise for Las Vegas. Let's talk about them. The Raiders are going to be picking 6th in the draft, and they have their own picks. There's a compensatory in round 6, 2 of them actually, and they have their own picks otherwise. So they didn't make any trading or draft picks. They obviously flipped one to Seattle for Geno, but they have picks in every round, and they're not coming from any other team. So that's where the Raiders are going with the draft. After getting Geno Smith, I guess the question would be this. Are you going to take the plunge and go Ashton Jeanty? Are you going to move around and get some receiver help and go McMillan? Because they do need a number 1 receiver there badly. Are they going to go cornerback and help out the secondary? Because they absolutely need that badly. Could Travis Hunter fall to them? The Raiders have kind of sort of an open canvas, really, to make some things happen and make a move or two. I think they got to go receiver. They have to do something at wide receiver. It's just not great. I like Jacoby Myers, but I don't love the rest of that receiving core. You got to give Brock Bowers some help in that room. And a running back. A running back should also be good, which means GT. Could GT be the pick? I do want to see what happens there. So with Las Vegas, there's a lot to like what they could be. Pete Carroll being the head coach, I would have to think this isn't going to be a long-term type of rebuild if they can help it. Will Vegas be aggressive in the draft and trade up and make a move? Who will they draft to try to help their offense? The help is needed ASAP. Let's go to Denver, where one of the longer droughts in terms of the playoffs in the NFL were ended. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't expected. The Broncos defense did its part, which we know by now is a very good unit. Pat Surtain won Defensive Player of the Year. He's not alone. The defense is very balanced. Alex Singleton, very good linebacker. Nick Bonino had a breakout year. Zach Allen was a great signing from the Cardinals. They have PJ Locke doing his thing. Riley Moss is a good corner. They are very well done on defense. Now, some of the numbers don't indicate that for some reason. It's a little surprising that some of the numbers are a little fly in the face of this. But the defense is overall very good. And the points is a perfect example of this. I'll start defense with Denver. They finished 3rd overall in terms of points allowed. That's how good Denver's defense showed themselves to be. Surprisingly, number 1 in points allowed, I have not mentioned. And the other 2 teams in this division are also in the top 5. I'll talk about that. Anyway, Denver is number 3 in points allowed. They are really good in terms of being really stingy. They know what they're doing there. Rushing defense, also 3rd, so that Denver can get it done, like I mentioned with Zach Allen and Bonino and Singleton and the rest of that crew on the defensive front. Now, one would think the passing defense would also be high. Turns out it wasn't. It was only average. It's really kind of sort of surprising, but Denver was bend but don't break. They were really good in the red zone in terms of defense. That's I guess, an indicator of that. And overall, the Bronco defense, you would think would be high, and it was. It was 7th. So Denver's defense knew what they were doing and could get it done and could be as locked down as it's pretty much been over a lot of the last decade. Offensively speaking, not as great, but it didn't necessarily have to be. And that's okay. They were only average, which, okay, fine. I think you could live with that with a really good with an elite defense. With the passing game, Bo Nix, I think, had a pretty respectable year, considering I think not a lot of expectations were on Bo and how early things looked like they were going to go south for Bo Nix. They were slightly below average. They were slightly below average, I think is the best way to say it. The running game, I was a little disappointed in because I really like Javonte Williams, but it didn't hit like I thought it would. Jaleel McLaughlin's okay, but it didn't hit like I thought. It was basically an average run game, so cool. That's all right, I guess. Again, a good defense. But they did score points, which was a little surprising. And maybe that's because of the turnovers and the defense being overall really, really good. They were actually hovering around the top 10 in points. They're actually 10th exactly in points allowed. The team that's 11th is right behind them. It's going to be one I'm going to talk about shortly. Anyway, Denver, they were surprising and they were productive. And making the playoffs for the first time since their Super Bowl 50 victory is very good. I'm impressed with how Denver turned it around. Yes, they got a free win against the Chiefs, but you take your wins against the Chiefs when you can get them. Good work by Denver. The Broncos, in terms of their cap space, is actually in respectable shape. Denver has $26.1 million in cap. They are solid there in terms of money. They are bottom 10 in terms of where they stand, actually 11th worst in terms of where they stand in the NFL. But it goes without saying that the Broncos have been somewhat aggressive in defense and making moves to fortify the defense even further. How so? They went to San Francisco and they got the Niners, two of the more devastating free agents out of that system. They got Hufanga to play the safety role. They got Dre Greenlaw to be maybe even the heart and soul under the PS2 of their linebacker unit to join Alex Singleton. That could be a nasty linebacker combination in Denver. They had tight end problems the entire season, so Evan Ingram's there to help the cause. And that would probably lessen their dependence on a Tyler Warren or lessen their dependence on a Colston Loveland in the draft. Possible they could still draft those guys, but they don't necessarily have to now. Denver might have a little bit of a hole at running back, letting Javonte Williams go, but at the very least, they have some pieces. They finally have a capable tight end and another pass catcher aside from Cortland Sutton, and Marvin Mims has really played pretty well over his career so far. The Broncos draft pick allotment. They have a few. They have their own picks in rounds 1 through 4 and 6. They have a Cardinals 6th. They have an Eagles 6th. That's where Denver's picks are. So far, it's not terrible for the Broncos. Can Denver get back to the playoffs? Sean Payton and company, after having a surprisingly good season. And can Bo Nix improve on year 2 from what was a pretty solid year 1? Time will tell on that front. I am a little concerned about their run game, though. Now to LA and the Chargers. And the Chargers were another team that were bad in 23, but ended up being pretty good in 24. They got a sort of bounce back year from Justin Herbert, but what the Chargers really got was good defense, and really good defense. Jim Harbaugh knows what he's doing on that side of the ball. How good, you ask? They were number 1 in terms of points allowed. They were very stingy. They got actual sort of healthy years from Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, which very necessary. Derwin James played fairly well. Asante Samuel Jr. still being a free agent is surprising. I think he's a good, very good young corner potentially. The Chargers played fairly well on that front and got a lot of the similar lineup from Brandon Staley's crew, and they turned into a good lineup again, which was impressive. Rush defense, above average, 14th. Good work. They were hovering around the last 3 years, so this is a very good look to see that they have improved so greatly. As for their pass defense, they were 7th. Again, really, really good work by the Chargers defense to make that kind of jump and make that kind of improvement. So, very good stuff by Los Angeles on the AFC side to make a resurgence on the defensive side of the ball. As for the offense, it really didn't hit like it probably should have, or at least as much as a lot of people would have you think that it should have. Justin Herbert's okay. Justin Herbert, it looks the part. He has the big arm, the big frame. He's athletic. He's mobile. So it has people fawning over him. But he really wasn't that particularly great this year. He was good. Don't get it confused. He wasn't great this year. And passing, actually, the Chargers were kind of sort of below average, which is a little disappointing based off of what you read. They were 13th from the bottom in terms of the passing game. In terms of total yardage, I should say. Total yardage. Passing game, they were, kind of below average. So, barely better than Denver. And literally, basically, slightly below average. So, like 14th from the bottom and 13th from the total passing standpoint. Now, rushing game, with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins actually healthy for 3/4 of the year, they were above average slightly. Not terrible, just a steady offense. They won because they were able to lock people down on defense and take the ball away when they could, and then Herbert gets it where he fits in. There is one exception and I'll get to the points real quick before I get to said exception. They were top 10 in points because, again, they were able to just kind of maul teams, and obviously a little bit shorter fields based off of the defense and defense causing turnovers, and then they would take advantage of that nicely. Good work there. They were top 10 in points, slightly behind Denver in this realm, so they were very good here, so actually 11th in points, but they were very good taking advantage of the opportunities that they had, which is something they really just didn't do previously. The one exception being Ladd McConkey. McConkey proved himself to be a very good value pick for Los Angeles in round 2, and I think in year 2, he could be really, really good as he's continued to get better in his career. As we saw in the playoff game, he could get busy. He was really, really good in the playoff game. Unfortunately, Justin Herbert was awful, and the 4 NLs, one was a pick 6, and another one could have been, and it was just a really disastrous day for Herbert. McConkey, great, but everything else, no bueno. It just was not getting it done. Their cap space, very good shape. 4th in the league, $63.8 million. They are been active in free agency as well, clearly looking for a wide receiver. They just haven't found him quite yet, at least a top-line wide receiver anyway. They have made some moves to try to help their situation. They got Najee Harris to help the running back situation. They did let Gus Edwards go, so it's going to be a mix of Najee Harris and J.K. Dobbins. So that's a physical, tough, imposing run game. And naturally, there is a good offensive line in front with Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. They just have to be healthy. And Chargers obviously let Joey Bosa go. He's now signed in Buffalo, as I've mentioned before. So the Chargers have some interesting needs they have to fix. They still got to get that number 1 receiver to help McConkey. They still have to get the tight end spot situated, which we'll get into the draft in a sec. And obviously another younger edge rusher to pair with Khalil Mack would also be a really good idea, I think. Speaking of the draft I just mentioned, they have picks in every round, and they have multiple picks in several of them. So the Chargers situation's like this. They start with a 22nd pick. They then have their picks in every other round. They have 4 in round 6, and one of them is New England's. They have a couple compensatories involved here. So the Chargers could really go to town in round 6 or trade up from them. One would think they're going to trade up somewhere, or maybe just stash the picks and stash the players. But yeah, the Chargers got a good amount of picks is the point, so they can fix some of these needs and maybe try to gain ground on Kansas City. They played the Chiefs twice and played them tough last year, but just couldn't finish the deal in either game. How will the Chargers close the gap with the reigning defending undisputed AFC champions? It feels like we've been here a lot lately. Kansas City has been the gold standard over the last 8 years or so. They've won 3 titles. They've been to 2 other Super Bowls. Their floor has been the AFC Championship. Since 2018, that's been the case, and that's been where Kansas City has gone. You know the names by now. You know the Tribal Chiefs. It's Mahomes, and it's Reed, and it's Kelsey, and it's Chris Jones. They have a good offensive line. Well, at least they used to. And now it's a little spotty, one would say. And their defense, they've shifted from a high-flying aerial attack on offense to a very bully-esque type of defense that can beat you 17-10 as opposed to 34-30. And Kansas City gets busy this way. They kind of sort of pummeled Houston into submission because Houston's offensive line was terrible and George Karlaftis had an all-pro day. They then do their annual thing, which is beating Buffalo every year in the playoffs. And then they ran into a freight train that is the Eagles with an offensive line that was badly overmatched by what the Eagles were bringing them. It was not great. Pat Mahomes was stable, solid, productive. Yes, he's still the best quarterback alive, but he was not the aerial show that you've seen from Mahomes that you used to see from Mahomes, honestly. They ran the ball okay, but Pacheco unfortunately had the injury that took him out for a couple of months, so it wasn't the same. Kareem Hunt did step in nicely in his absence. lose Rashee Rice to injury, and Hollywood Brown was injured before the season began, and DeAndre Hopkins do a decent job at receiver. Kelsey was okay at tight end, but nothing special. The defensive line, the defense did its part. Chris Jones doing his thing. George Karlaftis was solid. They were relatively good on defense, even though they traded L'Jarius Sneed to Tennessee. Trent McDuffie continues to hold it down in the secondary. But Kansas City didn't have anything glaring stand out except for how they won games. They won games by a toe. They won games by a block kick. They won games by a doink kick. They won games due to a pass interference call that went their way. That was holding by the Chiefs they got away with. They won games by a botch snap, which should have been a false start and was instead just called illegal formation. They won games that made a lot of people think that the refs were in their pockets. And as you can see, as one could tell, and even the AFC Championship game, people think they won that game because of the fourth down stop that shouldn't have been. Yet Kansas City won. They found ways to win. Some of them are frowned upon, but they found ways to win. Offensively speaking, where do we look at the Chiefs? What do we see from Kansas City? Total offense-wise, we're kind of below average, which, again, speaks to they don't have to beat people by bludgeoning them with Mahomes' deep shots, as much as people want to see that. Speaking of Mahomes and company, the passing game, again, kind of just average and not overly great. Just really a mediocre team doing that. Not running the football. You would think they'd be a little bit better, but they were slightly below average. Again, not overly great in anything offensively. And in points-wise, people complained all year that they just weren't putting up the points. They, in this realm, were just mediocre too. So maybe even above average. I'll give them above average here. So Kansas City wasn't all that crazy when it came to putting up points either. Defensively, however, the Chiefs were good. They were very impressive defensively. Top 10 defense, and they were ninth overall in total defense. They were, in terms of the passing defense, a little bit worse. Kind of an average passing defense there. Losing to L'Jarius Sneed will probably do that. And then the run defense, they were above average. They were top 10 here too. They were a very solid unit there. 8th best in terms of stopping the run. Points-wise, this is where they really shine. They did force their fair share of turnovers and got busy. They were the 4th best defense in the NFL when it came to points and allowing them, or lack thereof, which amazingly puts them 3rd best in the AFC West in terms of scoring points on them. Let it be known, unless you were playing the Raiders and you played anybody else in the AFC West, good luck getting points. I didn't mention the other team involved here that finished 2nd. You know why? They're going to be in the next video. You probably already know who they are by now. And anyway, Kansas City, in terms of their cap space, they have $28.4 million. That kind of puts them in the below average tier. And actually exactly average tier. Exactly right in the middle. Kansas City is in terms of their cap space. They did trade Joe Thuney away to the Bears and got an extra pick, which I'll get to that in a second. They just couldn't keep a lot of those guys together. You can understand that. Mahomes restructured his deal not too long ago, so Kansas City's going to have some more money wrapped up. And really, the Chiefs aren't here to make like earth-shattering moves. It just feels like Kansas City's just going to make the smaller ones and try to build around the talent they have. And in the case of wide receivers, get healthy when it comes to the likes of Rashee Rice, who tore his ACL last year. And we'll see what Xavier Worthy can do in year 2. He had some promise, and he showed it, especially in garbage time in the Super Bowl. But we do need to see if Xavier Worthy can be the home run hitter that a lot of people want him to be in this offense. And how healthy will Rashee Rice be, for that matter. The Chiefs, and they draft usually fairly well. They will be drafted like this. They have the 31st pick for obvious reasons in round 1. They have their own pick in round 2. They have picks in round 3. They have 2 of them. One of them's Tennessee from the Snead deal, which might as well be a 2 because it's a very high 2, very high 3. They have 2. They have a 4, and then they have no picks until round 7. They have 3 of those, and one of them's Carolina. The Chiefs aren't going away, not while 15 is there. Will Travis Kelce be around after this season? That's something I would like to know. as Kelsey has already said he's coming back. Is this his last ride? And with the three-peat off the table, will Kansas City just only have to settle for 3 out of 4? Something that we'll need to hear the answer to. And now to wrap it up for the AFC West, there's a lot of good defense here, and then the Raiders, who did not have very good defense. They do have Max Crosby, though. At least they paid him. One final division to go. It is the NFC East, which in some cases was back to its beast form. Well, 2 of the cases anyway. One made the NFC Championship. The other beat them in the NFC Championship. Then there were the Cowboys and Giants. I guess we have to talk about them too. New York and I guess New Jersey, you're going to be the first stop of my next train of thought.